After a disappointing 2021, considering all the talent on this roster, the Washington Commanders now look to rebound in 2022 and make the playoffs. I'm Jake, and this is Drew with Sports Around the Bar, and today we are going to be talking and grading the Washington Commanders offseason.
Now, as a lot of you don't know, this is actually my second favorite team in the NFL. Kind of wish they would have got a different name, but you know what? I'm not the one that signs the checks. Dan Snyder is. Man, let's just jump into free agency. Let's just get to it. Obviously the number one thing is Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz is now the quarterback. He is the guy at the helm, ready to control this offense. Obviously, we had Fitzpatrick last year. He got hurt. That obviously didn't work. We had Kyle Allen and Heineke literally kind of bouncing back and forth. Now it's time that we actually have a guy that should be able to play the majority of the season and control this offense. Do you, Jake, think that during this free agency that they put enough around him and didn't lose too much to keep this offense rolling? And real quickly, I love the running back core. I love Gibson. I love Kissick. And obviously, McLaurin's a great receiver.
I think they've tried. I think the effort is there, Drew. Even if I don't necessarily agree with the moves that they've made to kind of buff this offense up for Carson Wentz coming in, I at least liked some of the replacement level things. A lot of people have kind of forgotten that Andrew Norwell, before he went to Jacksonville, was like one of the best guards we've ever seen, and I think he was the highest paid guard when he went to Jacksonville. Yeah. So still some talent there, I think. I know he struggled in Jacksonville, but throw that out, wad it up. When you play for that bad of an organization, I think you can kind of overlook some of his shortcomings. I think bringing him in on a cheaper deal than what Brandon Sheriff, like the $18 million he got to head off to Jacksonville. They kind of swapped.
They did.
I think Washington has done a good job, at least, of putting some talent on this roster to kind of roll the dice to see who's actually going to win that spot. Trey Turner, another one of those guys that the past couple of years haven't been as kind to him as we've seen out of the past, like when he was in Carolina. But still, we might see a bit of a resurgence out of him. They've kind of thrown a bunch of darts at the board and said one of these is going to hit where we want it to, and he's going to be the guy who replaces Brandon Sheriff. So I think they've done okay there. We'll talk in the draft about bringing in receivers and everything to try to get better, but on paper, at least, Alex Erickson doesn't exactly scare anybody. They only paid him $1 million to come in as well, Drew. Not exactly the big A.J. Brown move we're seeing in the rest of the division, or Amari Cooper on his way out. These other teams in this division are making big moves at the position.
They are.
The Commanders instead have said, let's look at the draft to kind of address that.
Right, but when you have a number one receiver, I mean, that is kind of a position you could kind of relax on, but you would like to see them add a little bit more around it, and they do in the draft.
And A.J. Brown, I think, and Terry McLaurin are both on that similar level of these guys are the alpha number one. Put it in stone, we know he's going to be fine kind of wide receivers. The difference here, we're seeing the Eagles kind of lean into stacking up the rest of their wide receiving core and getting a bunch of other guys here. It's not like Washington hasn't tried bringing in guys like Curtis Samuel. They drafted Jahan Dotson, like I said, jumping the gun a little bit, but we'll talk about him in a minute. They are doing things to try to add some depth to this wide receiving group, and they're trying to keep the offensive line of strength, which has been one of their strengths in the past.
And this is bringing in Carson Wentz is going to help this situation. You have people like Curtis Samuel that didn't really do exactly what you expect him to do, and maybe it's because the quarterback wasn't that great.
Right.
I mean, when you bring in Wentz, those players at the receiving core are going to get better. They have to, or they're not going to be playing.
For all intents and purposes, you had a backup quarterback start the entire year. They were going to go with Fitzpatrick, but he wound up taking that hip injury. He was out for the entire season. So, yes, you should see some level of that high tide raising all boats when it comes to wide receiving talent. I think you're going to see that as well. As far as the rest of this list, we kind of talked about this before. There's not a lot of big names here. The Kyle Allen experiment's kind of over here.
Right.
Kind of sad to see for him on a personal level, but outside of that, it probably wasn't going to work. He just makes too many mistakes with the ball. But guys like DeAndre Carter, guys like Ricky Seals-Jones, even Jameel Douglas, Matt Ioannidis, guys that have been on this team for a little while that are now departing, they're just not major subtractions in my opinion. They're guys that maybe you keep them around because you like what they do, you like their attitude, everything else. But This isn't the Titans losing A.J. Brown to the Eagles. This isn't Amari Cooper leaving the Cowboys. You aren't losing that high-profile guy, and I think that's a good thing for Washington when you look at how good this roster should be, at least on paper.
Right, and let's get to their defense a little bit. They've literally kept everyone together in that defensive line. You still have Payne. You still have Allen. I mean, this should be a great defensive line. You still got Sweat. You still got Young. I mean,
I will say, out of all those guys, Tim Settle leaving as that third D tackle is probably the biggest subtraction, but still, when you're talking about we lost our third D tackle as our biggest negative, It's a pretty good offseason.
It is. And you're going to want to see all those guys take a step up. I know Young still plays a really high level, but you're going to want to see every single one of those players take a step up this year because this offense, even though you have Carson Wentz added to it, is going to need that support by the defense, and last year we did not get that support.
Absolutely, and Ife Obata coming in to play edge as well. Not a bad guy. I think he was out of Buffalo. Still, this is about the stars. It's about Montez Sweat. It's about Chase Young. Thank you. And those two studs at defensive tackle as well. This is about the studs, and Obata is hopefully that guy that comes in and is going to play 400 to 500 snaps and just be that third to fourth rotational guy that's going to be able to make a mistake or make an impact and also give guys time to rest in the defensive line.
Absolutely, man. Let's get into that draft. Let's see exactly how they brought in players to support the rest of these players.
One thing we always say is we swear we're going to tell you the truth, even if it hurts. You know, we could pump the pom-poms and say, oh, hey, this great job, everybody in the NFL, but some teams have to lose. I got to say, I'm not a huge fan of what Washington has done in the draft. Jahan Dotson, as a first-round pick, a lot of people said, you know, he could potentially be a guy that falls into day two. The fact that you spent pick 16 on him seems like a bit of a reach for a guy that's not quite 6 foot. You don't know that he's physically dominant enough to play as an outside guy in the NFL level. Is there a chance he makes it? Sure, Drew. Some of those guys have the work ethic to power through, and Dotson seems like he's a work ethic guy. But physically speaking, for 16th overall, you didn't get what you should have been buying at that position. They were, especially when you talk about guys like Treylon Burks still on the board. You could have gone another direction, and they chose instead to go with Jahan Dotson.
You see a lot of teams fall in love with players, especially receivers, that for some reason fits the scheme the offense wants to do. As a Kansas City Chiefs fan, I saw that happen with Nicole Hardman, where it's kind of like, I don't really understand this pick, but we're going to roll with it. Now, has Nicole Hardman really worked out for the Chiefs? I'd say probably not. Now, as a Commanders fans, you guys are hoping that Dotson is going to be that guy. Luckily, he doesn't have to take a role as a number one or number two. He does get to sit back and maybe be that number three role. At 16, he should be, right. But if he is placed in the fourth spot, it's going to be a great opportunity for him to learn and develop. But at 16, you expect him to play week one.
Going a little bit deeper into this draft, Fiderian Matthews, the defensive tackle out of Alabama. I'm sure you probably heard at this point if you're a Commanders fan, but apparently he wasn't even watching the draft when he was drafted because he wasn't expecting to go that high. He was watching the NBA playoffs instead. So not usually a great sign. He's another guy that doesn't really have the burst you usually look for at a highly drafted defensive tackle. Usually when you're taking a D tackle forward, you're saying he's physically got something that's going to make him a plus pass rusher at the next level, and I just haven't seen that out of Fiderian Matthews. But that sort of Alabama pedigree seems to continue. They seem to love getting those Alabama D tackles to fit in there. Hopefully he's able to outperform what my expectations are for him here. But at 47, Drew, I got to admit, man, this should have been a fourth-round pick, at least in my book. Now, nobody can ever truly predict the draft, but on paper, when you see what he's able to do and what he brings to the table, he should have been a fourth-round run-stuffing, run-assistance D tackle that comes off the field on second and third down.
Well, this is your replacement. This is the guy that is going to be rotating in and out. I mean, this is what they expect him to do. And when you have people like Allen and Payne, you don't really expect to have those guys out important downs. It's going to be those run downs that Mathis is going to come in and play. And that's it. And he's going to come off the field.
One other notable pick here in the third round that I want to talk about is Brian Robinson, also out of Alabama, the running back that doesn't have that high-end burst. Another guy that I don't want to be too critical because he can fill a role of that power back that's going to go get you 2.5 to 3 yards in those tough yardage situations. When it's 3rd and 2 and you want to put the 6 offensive linemen out there and run the jumbo package and run the ball, Brian Robinson is the guy that you want to be carrying it because he's going to get you that yardage. Outside of that, when it's 1st and 10 or 2nd and 8, I don't know that he's the running back. Again, you're drafting a role player in the spot that's going to go get you hard yardage, and then you're going to take him off the field, and somebody else is going to be playing running back. And they have Antonio Gibson. Like you said, they brought in J.D. McKissick. They have other guys that can fill some of those roles, but you are absolutely getting a typecast running back in Brian Robinson that's going to be good for one thing and one thing only, which is getting those ugly yards in 3rd and short.
Well, hopefully the GM knows exactly what they're doing because I am not in love with round 2 and round 3. I'd really like them to focus on their secondary, make it a little bit easier for our defensive line to get after our quarterbacks. They focus on a little bit in round 4 with Percy Butler, safety out of Louisiana. Is this a guy that you're going to see play a lot of downs?
You're hoping not. This is one of those picks that year 3, year 4 for him is a guy that you want to slowly introduce in there. But this is another one of those my guy kind of picks that when you get to the 4th round, it's okay to take. I'm not going to be too critical of that.
No, I'm not.
I know. I'm
not being critical of that.
And I'm not either, which is my point here. This is where you want to take these kind of picks, especially in a draft that is thinner, like we saw in 2022 than most years, especially through the middle, in my opinion. Getting a guy like Percy Butler here in this spot is much more forgivable than if you would have taken him in the 2nd round. Then we'd be like, what are you guys doing? But in the 4th round
true.
and afterward, it's get the guys that you like, get the guys whose attitudes fit your scheme,
right,
and try to mold them into the players you want them to be. And if it doesn't work, you wad it up and you throw it out and you move on to the next guy. So I think that's an appropriate pick for a guy like that. I want to talk about Sam Howell, though. So this was a guy that some people had as their top quarterback in this draft, so to scoop him in round 5, Drew, are we leaning positive or are we leaning negative? Because the positive part of me says there's a lot of talent at quarterback here for a guy like Sam Howell to be going in the 5th round. The negative says you just traded for Carson Wentz. Why are we drafting a quarterback on top of it?
Because Carson Wentz is not your quarterback of the long-term future. He is a quarterback now. He'll probably be banged up at some point in time this season. And I know you still have Heineke, but you're going to need somebody down the road. If any GM, any head coach remotely cares about the future of their job, it's if you don't have the quarterback of the long-term future, you're drafting a quarterback. And this is what it came. And honestly, Sam Howell in the 5th round is not a bad pickup for the Commanders at all.
I think one thing people forget about Howell is that when he was in college, 2 years ago, he was one of the top guys in the NFL in terms of prospects. Everybody came into 2021 season, I should say, saying Sam Howell might be a top quarterback pick. But then all of his talent left for the NFL. A bunch of receivers left. His running backs left as well. And they kind of tried to turn him into like a discount Tim Tebow, where they're like, you're a power running quarterback in college. That just doesn't work for most guys. Most of the time, you don't want to see the fullback style, put your shoulder down and plow through him role for a quarterback, but Sam Howell did it. And the thing is, I think one of the big positives for him is he could have said, listen, I'm not going to put my body on the line here. I'm going to be an NFL quarterback. Instead, he said, Coach, this is what the team needs. I'm going to go out there and do it. And he did, even though I think it kind of crushed his draft stock to do so.
Sure.
But that's the guy you want. You want the guy that says, I'm not going to do what's best for me. I'm going to do what's best for the team.
Ask Philadelphia fans about that about Carson Wentz. Anyways, let's talk about the 2020-22 season. Let's talk about it. I mean, what are the expectations? What do we see the Washington Commanders get out of this season? Are they fighting for the division with Carson Wentz at the helm?
I think they should be. I think the defense is still there. They still have William Jackson, who I know struggled in year 1. They still have this dominant defensive line that you're hoping to take that even next step forward. Guys like Montez Sweat getting better. Guys like Chase Young, getting better. Getting better. This defense should still be the highlight of this team. You should still run the ball pretty well with this offensive line. And now all of a sudden, regardless of how I feel about Jahan Dotson, you now have another name in the wide receiving group that should be a solid target for Carson Wentz. Even though I think he's a little bit limited and I didn't like where he was picked, there still is some talent there. You take him and put him with Scary Terry, Drew, the offense is better.
Yes.
Period.
So what? I'll do my grade first before I let you do your grade. I don't think you had to do a whole lot here to get a bad grade. Oh, no, let me rephrase that. I don't think you had to do a lot here to get a good grade, but I think you didn't do enough. When you bring in Carson Wentz, you automatically become a better team because you were playing with a backup quarterback. You get to number 1 quarterback. You get the starter, so you automatically get better. But what I've liked to have seen is maybe go out and get some of those high-profile names during free agency. Maybe I'd like you to draft a little bit better. I don't want to be so negative on this offseason, but I'm actually just going to give him a C+.
Leave that part for me because I'm going to give – go ahead.
I know, I'm just going to give him a C+, and it would have been a lot worse if they would have left the quarterback position where they were.
For me, the offseason is a D+. I like that they are trying to get better. I like that they're bringing in Carson Wentz. But when you consider the fact that Matt Ryan went for cheaper, and that's the deal you could have had instead,
right?
You have to say that was a missed opportunity. Same thing, in my opinion, with the draft. I think a lot of these guys that you took, they're not terrible players in their own right, but where you took them, you said, what could I have taken instead? I think they had foregone some other better players to take guys that they had fallen in love with, and I think long-term that isn't good for the team, but they're still making moves happen. I know Brandon Sheriff's gone, who has been one of the best guards in football, but they brought in Andrew Norwell, they brought in Trey Turner. They're going to get one of those guys to succeed and still be solid there. So they've done
probably both.
I can't say it was a an awful offseason. But when you consider what they gave up and the assets they had, has the team improved enough to really challenge in 2022? Let me ask you, Drew, are they winning this division? I think they'll challenge, but I think a week or two before the season's over, we're going to be talking about Washington not quite being in the race to win the division at least. I still think this is close to a playoff team with the talent leaving the NFC. They're still close to being in the playoffs.
Carson Wentz healthy, the defensive scheme and team plays like they should have 2 years ago. There's no reason they can't win the division.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, make sure you hit the subscribe button below and ring the bell to stay up to date with all of our NFL videos as well as everything else we're talking about in sports.
We have a great community on Facebook already, but we're trying to grow our community on YouTube because we believe you guys can talk sports just as well as anybody else, and we can't wait to have those conversations with you.
So grab a drink, hit subscribe, come talk sports with us.